Intro: A world without hours. Imagine a world where no ticking clock hangs on the wall. No alarms, no deadlines, no schedules, no numbered minutes quietly sliding past. A world where time is not something counted, but something felt, breathed by the earth, the seasons, the sky, and the rhythms of everyday life. For most of human history, this was reality. People lived, worked, slept, dreamed, and celebrated without ever glancing at a clock. In this script, we travel gently into that world, a calm, thoughtful exploration of how people sensed time before modern hours existed, how culture shaped perception, and how humans built meaning from the natural rhythms around them. Before mechanical clocks, before even sundials, people turned to the landscape. Time was described in colors, in temperature, in the angle of light. Waves of daily life were guided by birdsong, shadows, and routine tasks. The world moved at a different pace, fluid, intuitive, slower, yet in many ways far more harmonious. This was a world where people rose with the sun, not because a device beeped, but because the light slowly brushed against their eyelids and the warmth eased into their homes. They worked until they could no longer see, not until a number on a dial told them to stop. And within this natural rhythm, the passing of the day became a dialogue between humans and nature. In this journey, you will find no monotony. Each section will explore a different facet of how human beings lived, measured, interpreted, and experienced time without clocks. You will learn how ancient farmers relied on birds and dew, how merchants followed shadows, how travelers read stars, how monks structured their lives with bells, and how entire civilizations created unique, beautiful ideas of time before minutes and seconds ever existed. Together, we will wander through villages, fields, temples, nomadic camps, medieval towns, and ancient markets, each offering its own world of rhythms. We will observe how people prepared food, built homes, planned journeys, arranged meetings, and marked the passing of life, all without ever checking the time. This script is not just historical, but meditative. It invites you to slow down and immerse yourself in a softer understanding of time. There is no rush here, no ticking, no deadlines, only the gentle unfolding of life as it once was, when every moment was understood as part of a larger rhythm rather than a numbered slot. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and step into a world without clocks, a world where time flowed like a river instead of striking like a hammer. Section 1. The natural rhythm of light and shadow. Before clocks, time began with the sun. For countless generations, humans looked to the sky for their earliest understanding of the day's passage. Light itself was a language, soft in early morning, strong and warm at midday, golden and angled by late afternoon, dim and cooling into evening. People didn't ask, "What time is it?" They asked, "What does the light feel like?" Morning was not a number, it was a color. When dawn approached, the sky shifted through shades of blue, rose, and pale gold. Birds stirred first, their calls spreading through fields and forests like an announcement. The world was waking. Farmers, hunters, and travelers learned to wake not from a jarring alarm, but from the glow behind the horizon, the gradual warmth seeping into their shelters, or the soft rustling of animals beginning their day. To people without clocks, sunrise was not a single moment. It was a slow bloom, a gentle, almost sacred transition. Workers prepared themselves at a pace that matched the light. No one sprinted out of bed fearing lateness. Instead, the body naturally aligned itself with the growing brightness. Morning was a sensation, not a schedule. Shadows became a moving map. Throughout the day, shadows stretched, shrank, shifted, and rotated. They were among humanity's first reliable markers of time. Skilled farmers could tell how long they had been working by the angle of a tree's shadow. Shepherds used the length of shadows on hillsides to decide when to move their flocks. In ancient towns, builders and merchants often used architectural shadows, especially from towers, columns, or temple walls, to pace their tasks. A tall object made at least 3 distinct shadows each day, long and cool in the morning, pointing westward, short and tight at midday, barely reaching the ground, long and warm in the afternoon, leaning toward the east. People learned to read these shadows as one might read the hands of a clock today. A skilled observer could tell whether the day was still young or nearing its end simply by where a shadow fell, something so obvious to them that they hardly thought about it. The midday heat as a natural divider. Clocks divide time into hours, but before hours existed, midday was recognized viscerally. At this moment, when the sun hung highest, the warmth intensified, and the world grew brighter than at any other time. Many cultures recognized this natural turning point in the day. Farmers paused not because a schedule told them to take a break, but because the sun made work uncomfortable. Resting in the shade, eating a simple meal, or reclining to conserve energy became an instinctive part of daily rhythm. This was not laziness, it was harmony with nature. In regions with strong midday heat, Greece, Italy, Spain, Egypt, this natural pause evolved into formal customs like the siesta, long before mechanical timekeeping existed. The afternoon light as a daily reminder. As the sun drifted downward, the light became warmer and more angled. People knew the day's productive hours were shrinking. Tasks requiring precision, weaving, carpentry, repairing tools, choosing seeds, were moved earlier in the day, while simpler tasks, such as sweeping, feeding animals, or hauling water, shifted to the late afternoon. The afternoon became a period of closure. Not a moment, but a mood. A softness settled over villages. Shadows lengthened, animals began to slow, and people naturally prepared for evening. Twilight, the most symbolic time of day. When clocks did not exist, twilight held deep cultural meaning. It was a boundary between worlds, day and night, work and rest, the known and the mysterious. Twilight signaled time for cooking, gathering, storytelling, and reflection. Fires were lit, not on a fixed schedule, but guided by the dimming sky. Some communities believed that twilight had spiritual significance. It was said to be a time when spirits walked, when prayers were especially powerful, or when ancestors listened more closely. In many cultures, twilight was associated with protection rituals, closing shutters, tying cords, or lighting lamps to guide family members home. Nightfall, the end of the daily cycle. Finally, darkness settled. Without electric lights, the world became deeply still. The day had ended, not because a clock declared midnight, but because the earth and sky had drawn a natural curtain. Night was a time of rest, yet also of navigation for some. Hunters, fishermen, and travelers, familiar with the patterns of the moon and stars, could move with astonishing confidence through the darkness. But for most, night was a reminder of vulnerability, quiet, and renewal. The day's cycle had completed itself, and sleep followed naturally. Section 2. Seasonal Time. How nature marked the long rhythm of the year, before humans ever imagined slicing time into hours, minutes, and seconds. They lived by a much larger and more patient clock, the turning of the seasons. This seasonal clock did not tick or chime. It shifted gradually, almost imperceptibly, revealing its changes through temperature, the angle of sunlight, the movement of animals, and the growth of plants. For thousands of years, people recognized these transitions not as a background to their lives, but as the very rhythm that shaped everything they did. When the world itself was the calendar, without clocks, calendars, or even written records, early communities tracked the year by observing nature with extraordinary attention. They listened to the first birdsong of spring, watched for the swelling of buds on trees, noticed when rivers thawed or when the first frost coated the grass. These subtle cues told them more about time than any number ever could. The year was not divided into 4 seasons everywhere. Some places recognized only 2, the wet season and the dry season. Others noticed mountain winds, shifting river levels, or the behavior of migratory animals. Time was not standardized, it was local. Each region created its own system, shaped by its own environment. In tropical areas, for example, people viewed time through cycles of rain. In northern regions, time was defined by the shifting length of daylight. Everywhere, nature provided a slow, flowing rhythm. The arrival of spring, time of beginnings. When winter loosened its grip, people sensed the shift long before any official date on a calendar. Days stretched slightly longer, air softened, snowmelt trickled into streams. Birds returned, sometimes in massive, swirling migrations that filled the sky like living rivers. For farming communities, spring was the true new year. It marked the beginning of work and hope. Seeds were chosen with care, not by the date, but by the soil's warmth and the appearance of certain wildflowers that signaled planting time. The natural world acted as a guidebook. If particular plants bloomed too early or too late, people interpreted it as a sign of a coming drought, a warm summer, or a difficult winter. Spring was not simply a season, it was a promise. Summer, the season of abundance. As days grew hotter and longer, people moved into summer routines shaped entirely by the natural world. Before clocks, the length of daylight itself was a kind of schedule. Work stretched while the sun was high. Nights were shorter, sleep lighter, and tasks expanded into the warm evenings. In fishing communities, summer tides determined work rhythms. In farming regions, the growth of crops dictated daily priorities. Each plant had its own timeline, and people learned them intimately. How many days after planting corn should sprout? How wheat should feel in the hand when almost ripe? How vines smelled when fruit was nearing sweetness? Summer was also a season of gatherings. Travel was easier, roads more open, rivers calmer. Celebrations happened not on fixed calendar dates, but when the berries ripen, or when the moon is high and warm. Communities align their lives with the living world, not numbers. Autumn. Nature's whisper of preparation. Autumn revealed itself in quiet, subtle changes. A shift in wind, the first cool evenings, leaves beginning to tip with color. People without clocks knew autumn not by dates, but by the scent of the air. That crisp, earthy smell that signals the earth preparing for sleep. For most cultures, this season required immense labor. Harvesting, preserving, drying, storing, preparing. Every task was linked to natural timing. Grains needed to be cut when their stalks bent a certain way. Fruit had to be gathered before the first frost. Herbs were hung to dry when their oils were strongest. Families moved in harmony with the season's pace, fast or slow, depending on the harvest. Animals also gave clues. The thickness of fur, the migration of birds, or the behavior of bees told people how harsh the coming winter might be. These subtle signals shaped everything from how much wood to gather to how tightly shelters should be sealed. Autumn carried both beauty and urgency. It was a time of gratitude and caution. Winter, the long pause. Before clocks, winter was not simply a cold season. It was a profound slowdown of the entire world. Days shortened dramatically. Night dominated. The natural world grew silent. Animals burrowed or migrated, and people withdrew into their homes. Time in winter stretched in a way modern people rarely experience. Work slowed because daylight was scarce. Travel became difficult. Tasks centered around maintenance, mending tools, spinning wool, preparing food, teaching children stories of ancestors. Winter was a time for oral tradition. Long evenings spent by the hearth, sharing knowledge through tales told again and again. Without clocks, these nights had no hours. They lasted as long as the fire and the energy of the storytellers. In winter, people sensed time through weather patterns, moon phases, or the cycle of feasting and fasting. Life became more inward and reflective, almost spiritual in its quietness. Seasonal ceremonies, time measured through meaning. Without clocks, people embedded time in rituals. Each community held ceremonies in sync with the natural calendar. Harvest festivals, solstice celebrations, planting blessings, and midwinter fires. These gatherings weren't tied to numbered dates. They happened when the world felt right. Spring meant renewal. Summer meant vitality. Autumn meant gratitude. Winter meant endurance. Time, in this sense, was emotional as well as practical. And because the seasonal clock moved slowly, people lived with a sense of spaciousness. Life was not rushed from event to event. It was carried along by cycles that everyone shared and understood deeply. The year as a living being. To people who lived without clocks, time did not feel linear. It felt circular, like a wheel that turned steadily, repeating patterns, yet never perfectly the same. Every year brought familiar markers, but each arrival of spring or winter carried its own personality, shaped by rainfall, temperature, and the unpredictable nature of the world. The year was not measured, it was experienced, and it connected people to nature in ways that modern timekeeping often obscures. 3. The sky is timekeeper, reading the heavens without a clock. Long before ticking mechanisms and standardized hours, people raised their eyes to the sky to understand the passage of time. The heavens provided a vast, moving tapestry, a clock without gears, a calendar without pages, a system as old as the world itself. The sun, moon, and stars shifted in graceful patterns, and generations learned to read these patterns as fluently as we read numbers on a screen today. The sky was not just a backdrop. It was the guide, the regulator, the great teacher of rhythm. The sun's daily arc, a natural clock without numbers. The oldest form of timekeeping required nothing more than sunlight. People noticed how the sun rose in different places throughout the year, and how it climbed higher in summer and lower in winter. The shape of shadows became a language. A long morning shadow meant early day, and a short one meant midday. Before clocks, entire communities used shadow reading as second nature. Nomadic tribes traveling across open plains could tell the time simply by examining the angle of the sun on their footprints. Farmers knew when to stop working based on the lengthening of shadows over the ground. Caravans in deserts relied on the sun's movement to pace their journeys, resting when the heat peaked and resuming when the sun angled lower. Time was not fixed. It was felt through light. Sunrise and sunset as daily anchors. Morning and evening were not defined by minutes, but by atmosphere. The soft light before sunrise, the temperature shift as the world cooled, the silhouettes of birds beginning their chorus. These sensations told people the day had begun long before the sun even appeared. Sunset, too, was a slow descent rather than a precise moment. The sky dimmed, colors changed, shadows softened, and the air grew calmer. Families ended their work, not because a clock commanded it, but because the light gently signaled that it was time to rest. The daily cycle of the sun created a rhythm that was universal, predictable, and deeply tied to human biology. Without artificial light, people's bodies aligned perfectly with these cues, waking with dawn, growing drowsy after dusk. Sleep patterns were natural, not forced. The moon, the quiet keeper of longer time. If the sun created daily rhythm, the moon created monthly rhythm. Its phases, new, crescent, quarter, gibbous, full, provided a cycle that early humans could see clearly and remember easily. The moon was visible even to nomads, travelers, and people without stable homes. It was the most democratic of all timekeepers. Communities used the moon for tracking long journeys, counting nights of travel, scheduling planting and harvesting, believing certain phases aided growth, coordinating meetings, since a bright moon eased nighttime travel, marking celebrations, especially full moon ceremonies. In coastal regions, the moon carried a deeper meaning. It controlled the tides. Fishermen could predict the rhythm of the sea simply by watching the sky. Without clocks, this knowledge was crucial. Entire livelihoods depended on understanding how moonlight shaped the rise and fall of water. And in spiritual traditions, the moon held symbolic weight. Its waxing and waning mirrored life itself: birth, growth, fullness, decline, renewal. For many societies, the lunar cycle became the soul's calendar, counting time by stars and constellations. Above the moon and sun stretched a deeper, more mysterious system, the stars. To ancient observers, the night sky was a map filled with delicate patterns that returned every year with unwavering consistency. Constellations rose and set at specific seasons, acting as signposts for time's greater movements. People without clocks read the sky in ways that seem extraordinary today. The appearance of the constellation Orion signaled winter's approach. The rising of Sirius, the dog star, foretold the yearly flooding of the Nile. The Pleiades cluster indicated planting season in many early cultures. The North Star, fixed in place, guided sailors and travelers across continents. The sky gave direction, memory, and predictability in a world without mechanical measurement. Shepherds on mountain slopes could tell how late it was by which stars had appeared. Sailors navigated vast oceans, trusting in celestial timing that no storm could erase. Farmers knew when the year was turning, not by dates on a page, but by the shifting position of familiar stars. To them, the sky was a steady companion, always speaking, always guiding. Seasonal movements of the heavens. Just as the earth moved, so did the patterns above it. Over the course of a year, entire constellations drifted across the night sky. People learned these movements like chapters in a story. Winter sky, clear, crisp, filled with bright stars. Summer sky, hazier, with different constellations rising earlier. Spring sky, transitional, a blend of change and promise. Autumn sky, deep and dark, signaling harvest and approaching cold. Each shift reminded people of the turning of the year. The heavens served as a vast reminder that time was not something they controlled. It was something they flowed with. Celestial time in daily life. The sky shaped practical life in surprising ways. Hunters traveled at night under bright stars to avoid daytime heat. Campfires were built before the moon set. Travelers set departure times based on when constellations reached certain heights. Children learned stories explaining the stars, which doubled as memory tools for when to herd animals or gather particular plants. Astronomy and daily survival were inseparable. Before clocks turned time into a series of numbers, the sky made time feel alive, like a companion that both comforted and guided. Sky watching as a spiritual experience for many ancient peoples. Reading the sky was not just science, it was relationship. The heavens were believed to send messages, warnings, and blessings. Priests and shamans watched eclipses closely, seeing them as celestial turning points. Meteor showers were interpreted as seasonal markers, were signs of change. Because the sky was vast and unreachable, it carried an aura of the sacred. People looked upward and felt humbled, grounded, and connected to something larger than themselves. Time was not just measured by the heavens, it was given meaning by them. A world lit and timed by stars today. Artificial lights dim our ability to see the night sky. But in a world without electricity, the stars were impossibly bright. Entire galaxies were visible. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a luminous river. Watching the stars was not rare or special. It was nightly routine. People did not lose time staring at the sky. They found it. 4. Time in the body, living by hunger, fatigue, and the rhythm of life. In a world without clocks, time did not only live in the sky or in the natural environment, it lived inside the human body. Every beat of the heart, every rise and fall of energy, every ebb and flow of emotion formed part of an internal rhythm far older than numbered hours. Before people divided their days into minutes and seconds, they had a deep, instinctive awareness of their physical sensations. Life moved according to hunger, rest, effort, and renewal. Time was not something watched, it was something felt. The natural clock of hunger. Long before mechanical timekeeping, the body told people when the day was beginning to turn. Hunger acted as an internal measure, carving the day into natural segments. Morning hunger was different from afternoon hunger. People recognized this without needing a precise schedule. After waking, a light meal often came shortly after the first chores were done. Gathering wood, tending to animals, or preparing the fire. This was not breakfast at 7 a.m. It was breakfast when the body awakened enough to request it. In farming communities, the rhythm of meals shaped the workday. A midday meal arrived when muscles began to ache from morning labor. The evening meal, larger and more communal, appeared when the day's tasks were completed, and the body signaled its need for rest and warmth. Hunger spoke clearly, and people listened effortlessly. Fatigue as a marker of time. Similarly, tiredness served as one of the world's most ancient clocks. Without artificial lighting or structured work shifts, fatigue was honest and unavoidable. At dusk, as the world dimmed, the body naturally began to slow. People experienced a deep physical understanding. The day is ending. There was no pressure to stay awake longer than their bodies wished. In many earlier societies, people slept in two phases, something modern scientists call biphasic sleep. The first sleep happened soon after sunset and lasted several hours. People would then wake gently in the middle of the night, not to work or rush, but to think, talk quietly, pray, or simply sit by the fire. The second sleep lasted until dawn. This natural rhythm existed without clocks, alarms, or schedules. The body dictated the pattern, and the pattern made sense. Fatigue told them when to stop working. Rest told them when to begin again. Energy flows as daily signals, because life was physically demanding, carrying water, grinding grain, building fires, harvesting fields. People were closely attuned to subtle changes in their energy. This awareness acted as a silent guide. Early morning energy felt fresh and sharp. It was when people performed tasks requiring coordination and strength. As the sun climbed and heat increased, energy would stretch and soften. Afternoon tasks tended to be slower, quieter, more repetitive. Weaving, mending tools, or preparing food. Evening energy shifted again. The body felt a natural calm, an invitation to slow down, to join others in shared meals or storytelling. Instead of fitting themselves into a rigid schedule, people shaped their days around the natural rise and fall of their own vitality, the pulse and breath as ancient timekeepers. Before clocks, before calendars, before sundials, there were two unbroken rhythms, the heartbeat and the breath. These were the earliest tools of measurement. A runner measured distance by how many breaths it took to cross a field. A healer measured fever by counting heartbeats. A mother knew when her infant was drifting to sleep by the slow lengthening of tiny breaths. A fisherman knew how long nets should soak in the water by the steady rhythm of his own inhalations. Because clocks didn't exist, people didn't try to escape or ignore these bodily rhythms. They leaned into them. The body became the center of understanding, not an obstacle to overcome. Pain, healing, and time's slow passing. Illness and injury were also measured through inward time. Without antibiotics or advanced medicine, healing was slow and deeply observed. People could sense the passage of days through the changing qualities of pain. Sharp becoming dull, swelling receding, warmth fading. The rhythm of recovery was not rushed. It was accepted. Time was not forced to move quickly. Instead, people allowed their bodies to lead the way. A healing wound was not an inconvenience. It was a reminder that time itself was alive. This intimate connection between time and the body created patience that modern life often lacks. People respected the slow pace of recovery in themselves and in others. Instinctive coordination in communities. Without clocks, communities developed shared rhythms that needed no verbal planning. Farmers began their work when they heard others in the fields. Fishermen left shore when they saw other boats preparing. Villagers gathered when they heard the communal sound of a bell, drum, or simply footsteps approaching. Synchronized yet unplanned, these systems depended on listening, observing, and understanding the unspoken language of bodies moving together. Children mimicked the rhythms of adults, learning naturally when to help, when to rest, when to gather, and when to retreat. People moved like a flock, each individual guided by a combination of instinct, observation, and intuition and bodily awareness. Emotional time, when feelings measured the day. Time was not only experienced through physical sensations. Emotions shaped its flow as well. Joy made the day feel smooth and fast. Grief made time feel heavy and slow. Excitement added quickness to the hours, while worry stretched them out. Without clocks, people did not fight these emotional rhythms. They surrendered to them. Celebrations lasted as long as the joy lasted. Mourning lasted as long as tears flowed. Moments weren't scheduled. They unfolded. Life was lived in psychological time, not mechanical time. Intuition as the final clock. Perhaps the strongest timekeeper of all was something modern life rarely relies on. Intuition. The inner sense that now is the right moment, or now is the time to wait. Without clocks dictating deadlines, intuition guided decisions both small and large. People trusted their instincts about when to sow, when to travel, when to speak, when to rest, and when to act. The world moved more slowly, but more harmoniously. The body as a living calendar. In the end, the body served as a gentle narrator of time's passage. Muscles, hunger, energy, breath, heartbeat, fatigue, emotion. Everything worked together to create a system of timing that felt human, natural, and profoundly connected. Time did not rule them. It lived within them. Section 5. Time in the age of seasons when nature was the ancient calendar. Long before clocks ticked on walls, before church towers struck their bells across villages, and before the mechanical rhythm of gears decided when people woke, worked, or rested, human beings lived inside a world whose time was not counted, but felt. To people of ancient societies, the world was not divided into hours or minutes, but into the grand, slow breaths of the natural world. The shifting of the seasons, the cycle of plant and animal life, the watering of rivers, the lengthening and shortening of shadows. In this section, we step deeply into that world, into an era when the year itself was the clock, and every season presented a chapter of life so distinct, so deeply tied to survival, that people did not measure time, they inhabited it. The year as a living being. Imagine yourself in a world without mechanical timekeepers. No ticking resonates through rooms. No alarms ring. There is no concept of 9 a.m. or 2:45 p.m. Instead, there are seasons, and each is a personality, a presence, a companion that walks beside entire communities. Spring was not a date on a calendar. It was the first gentle warmth that loosened the frozen soil. Summer was the time when the land was generous and overflowing. Autumn was the season of gratitude and preparation. Winter was the great silence. The test, the darkness to outlast. People marked time by noticing changes in the wind, the sound of birds returning, the scent of blooming plants, or the behavior of animals. The world itself served as an enormous, ever-shifting clock face, one that required attention, mindfulness, and an intimacy with nature modern society rarely experiences. Seasonal routines as natural schedules. Seasonal tasks were the universal timekeepers in a pre-clock society. Life did not follow hour-by-hour schedules, but task cycles. A farmer did not say it's 7 a.m., time to plow. He said, the soil is soft now. Today is a plowing day. A fisherman did not think it's 5 in the morning. He thought, the tide is coming in. Now is the moment. Every task emerged when nature signaled it, not when humans demanded it. For example, planting season began when the ground thawed enough to accept seeds. Harvest season arrived when plants themselves declared their ripeness. Migration seasons were marked by birds filling the sky, creating living calendars. Winter preparations started when the first frost touched the leaves. These were not merely actions, they were rhythms. People lived inside them, trusting the wisdom of the earth. The seasons provided structure, almost like chapters in a story that repeated every year, yet always felt different. Festivals and rituals as anchors of time. In a world without clocks, People used rituals to anchor their lives. Festivals, ceremonies, and communal gatherings created recognizable markers that everyone understood. A solstice was not an astronomical fact. It was the moment the sun stood still, celebrated through bonfires, feasts, chants, and hope. An equinox was a quiet promise that day and night were once again equal. Ancient communities held festivals not only to worship deities, but to announce a new season, to remind themselves where in the great cycle of the year they stood. The first harvest feast meant the land had provided enough for survival. The final hunt of autumn meant winter was at the doorstep. Spring festivals honored seeds, fertility, and the return of light. These rituals were more than celebrations. They were temporal markers, serving the same function that dates on calendars do today. People didn't say, "It's April." They said, "It is the time of the first flowers." They didn't say, "It's late December." They said, "The longest night has passed. Light will now return." Time was poetic, not numerical. The seasons as teachers. Without mechanical time, people learned to read nature with a precision that is astonishing in the modern age. They became observers of the angle of the rising sun, the behavior of animals preparing for cold weather, the bloom patterns of specific plants, the height of rivers, the intensity of winds. They noticed tiny details. When bees flew lower to the ground, rain was approaching. When certain flowers bloomed, it was safe to plant crops. When geese flew south in a V formation, winter was soon to arrive. The seasons communicated constantly through these signs. People learned to interpret them as fluently as modern humans read digital screens. Their survival depended on it. Where clocks were unnecessary. In societies governed by seasons, urgency was different from today. There were no deadlines measured by minutes. Instead, urgency came from nature itself. A storm approaching required immediate action. A sudden frost meant crops had to be harvested at once. An early thaw might force last-minute preparations. People were trained to respond to the world quickly, not because of a beep or a schedule, but because nature shifted and the community had to shift with it. In this sense, time was both gentler and harsher. Gentler because it flowed naturally, harsher because missing nature's signals had real consequences. Yet people were deeply attuned, and there was grace in that attunement. The emotional texture of seasonal time. There is a remarkable calmness in seasonal living. Without clocks measuring every passing second, life feels fuller, softer, more connected. Days stretch or contract depending on what the world offers. People lived with acceptance, acknowledging that they were not separate from nature's timeline. They were part of it. Spring brought optimism. Summer brought confidence. Autumn brought reflection. Winter brought introspection and resilience. The year was emotional as much as it was practical. Every season held a lesson, shaping people not just physically, but spiritually. The beauty of slow, cyclical time. The absence of mechanical time created a kind of psychological spaciousness that is rare today. People did not constantly measure themselves against a clock. They didn't feel late for every small thing. They moved with purpose, but without haste. rooted in cycles that had existed for millennia before them and would continue for millennia after. Time was not something they controlled. It was something they respected. Section 6. The human body as a natural clock. Long before the invention of mechanical clocks, before sand trickled through hourglasses and water dripped steadily through ancient clepsydras, the human body itself served as one of the most reliable and intimate timekeepers. People lived so closely connected to their own rhythms, physical, emotional, and instinctual, that their bodies told them what the modern world now learns from alarms, calendars, and notifications. In this section, we explore a quieter era when time was not something displayed on a device, but something felt within muscles, breath, hunger, fatigue, and intuition. Waking with the light. In a world without artificial illumination, sunrise and sunset dictated the basic shape of each day. Humans, like all diurnal animals, evolved to respond to the planet's rotation. When the sun rose, the body quietly stirred. Light filtered through eyelids and triggered a cascade of biological reactions. Cortisol gently increasing, melatonin gradually retreating, heart rate rising, warmth returning. People woke not to a ringing alarm, but to a subtle, natural feeling that the day had begun. There was no rushing or jolting awake. The morning entered the body softly. This made waking far more peaceful, more aligned with how human biology naturally operates. Similarly, at dusk, when the sky darkened and color drained into shades of blue and gray, the body signaled that rest approached. Without screens, lamps, or city lights, melatonin surged more rapidly. Evening itself became a slow exhale. The body, in this sense, was a clock tuned to light, appetite as a timekeeper. Throughout the day, hunger functioned as another reliable indicator of time. Meal times were not scheduled by the hour. They arrived according to need and activity. Early farmers ate when the body demanded fuel for labor. Hunters responded to the cycles of alertness and energy. Gatherers paused when their strength dipped, or when the sun's position suggested midday. Regular eating patterns still formed naturally, shaped by the intensity of morning work, the midday heat, the communal timing of shared meals, the availability of food depending on the season. People knew instinctively when enough time had passed for hunger to return. They listened to their stomachs, not to a schedule printed on paper. Meals were dictated by the body's rhythm, not the ticking of any device. Fatigue as a marker of day's end. As daylight faded, fatigue deepened. In ancient societies, nighttime was profoundly dark. No street lamps, no glowing windows, no handheld screens emitting blue light. Only fire illuminated the world, and even that flickered softly. With darkness came an instinctive sense of closure. People felt when the day's work was over. Exhaustion from physical labor created a natural arc of the day, like a story with a clear ending. They slept when tired, not when a fixed number on a clock told them to. This allowed sleep cycles to match the body's natural circadian rhythm more closely than in modern life. It created better rest, deeper dreams, and a more synchronized relationship with the Earth's rotation. Emotion as an internal calendar. Human emotions, too, acted as indicators of time. They changed throughout the day with a rhythm almost predictable. Morning brought alertness and optimism. Afternoon brought steadiness and productivity. Evening brought introspection and quiet. People experienced these emotional phases without needing psychological terms. They simply observed, "This is the time of day when I feel strong. This is when I grow reflective. This is when my mind wants silence." Emotions also shifted through seasons. Longer daylight increased energy. Winter darkness brought introspection. These emotional transitions were meaningful ways to experience time, reminding people that the inner world was tied to the outer one. Breathing and movement as subtle time signals. During activities such as walking long distances, harvesting crops, or grinding grain, the body fell into rhythms, steady breathing, coordinated movements, repeated gestures. These rhythms became informal units of measurement. A traveler might say, "The village is 3 songs away," meaning 3 periods of chanting or humming to pass the time. Others measured distances by the number of rests needed or the number of breaths between tasks. The body became a metronome, quietly marking intervals without anyone naming them as hours or minutes. A long walk, the stirring of a pot, the knitting of wool, or the beating of cloth against river stones, all these had internal tempos that people instinctively understood. Time flowed through movement. Memory as a natural chronicle. Without clocks, memory carried great responsibility. It functioned as a chronological anchor, helping people know how much time had passed since important events. Memory was sharpened through storytelling, ritual, repetition, observation of change, generational knowledge. A person might remember the last rainfall not by the date, but by thinking, "It was the day after the flock returned from the far pasture," or "It was the evening when the moon was almost full." This relational memory created a more emotionally connected timeline. Events were remembered in context, not as isolated dates. Time became a tapestry of lived experience. Illness and healing as natural clocks. Healing, too, measured time. Without hospitals or precise medical tools, people watched their bodies to understand how long recovery took. The slow mending of a wound, the gradual cooling of a fever, or the pace of regained strength, all acted as temporal markers. Communities used healing as a guide. When your strength returns, the harvest will begin. When this wound closes, the season of storms will be near. This created patience. Healing was not rushed. It unfolded at the body's pace, teaching people to respect the slow processes of biology. Pregnancy and birth as long cycles of time. One of the most significant biological timekeepers was pregnancy. Without precise measurement tools, communities relied on observation, shifts in appetite, new sensitivities, changes in posture, the baby's movements, the mother's energy levels. They understood the 9-month cycle intuitively, long before medical science codified it. Pregnancy linked the body directly to the passing of seasons, often beginning in one type of weather and ending in another. This created a profound sense of cyclical life, one that paralleled nature's own rhythms. Intuition, the ancient human clock. Ultimately, the greatest timekeeper was intuition. Before clocks, people trusted themselves. They believed the body knew what the mind could not calculate. They knew when enough time had passed to return home, when the day was drawing to a close, or when a task had reached completion. Intuition was not mystical. It was a finely trained awareness. Humans survived by listening to their bodies, and so their bodies rarely misled them. In those ancient days, time was not an external force, but an internal companion. Quiet, gentle, always present. Section 7. Time in the rhythm of work and labor. Before the arrival of clocks, time was not a rigid system, but a living rhythm that people felt through their work. Every task, whether tending fields, weaving cloth, forging metal, or raising animals, had its own natural tempo. The day unfolded not in hours and minutes, but in cycles of effort, rest, and renewal. Work itself became one of the most accurate and deeply human ways to understand the passage of time. This section brings you into that softer world where time was not tracked but lived. The pace of the fields. Agricultural life operated according to the sun, the soil, and the seasons. Early farmers understood that there was a perfect moment for each action. Plowing, sowing, watering, harvesting. And this sense of timing came from observing nature rather than measuring hours. At dawn, the fields were cool and quiet. Farmers began their tasks the moment there was enough light to see the ground. They worked steadily until the warmth of midday signaled that it was time to pause, eat, breathe, and rest. Without a clock, their bodies simply knew. The sun is high, the air is heavy. Now is the moment to stop. Later, as the shadows lengthened and the wind softened, work resumed. The fields themselves taught people when to slow down, when to push forward, and when to step back. The natural world created a rhythm, and humans moved with it, not against it. Craftsmen and the slow art of precision. Inside workshops, wooden, dimly lit, sometimes warmed by a small fire, craftsmen worked with a time sense very different from the frenetic pace of modern production. A blacksmith did not count minutes while heating iron. He watched the color of the metal change from dark red to bright orange to nearly white. The glow itself was the signal, the unspoken rule. He felt when it was ready by the way the air shimmered and the way the metal softened beneath the hammer. A potter did not watch a clock to know when clay was dry enough to shape. They touched the surface gently, feeling the shift from slippery to firm, from firm to leather hard, from leather hard to brittle. Each stage had its own texture, its own form of time. A weaver did not measure her day by hours, but by the gradual growth of the cloth on her loom. The rhythmic tapping of the shuttle became a living metronome. Long before anyone spoke of mindfulness, these crafts were practices of deep presence, work that required a quiet mind and a steady hand. In these trades, time was not counted. It was felt through skill, observation, and the subtle communication between human and material. Domestic rhythms, the silent clocks of the home. Inside homes, the work of daily life unfolded in a gentle but reliable sequence. A household might be guided by the crackling of the morning fire, the boiling of water, the kneading of dough, or the soft rising and falling of bread. Each had its own rhythm. You didn't need a timer to know when the dough was ready. You pressed it lightly and felt it spring back under your fingertips. Women who spun wool or thread could tell how much time had passed by the fullness of the spindle. A single afternoon could be marked by the slow widening of a yarn ball. Children sensed time by the chores they were given, the lengthening of shadows, or the moment when smells from the kitchen signaled that evening approached. Even cleaning had its own tempo, sweeping, washing, airing fabrics under the sun. These patterns flowed like a tide, predictable, steady, and deeply connected to both the body and the physical environment. Home was a world where time moved quietly, but with harmony. Communal work, time shared among many. Many tasks in early societies were done communally. Harvesting, building homes, digging irrigation systems, raising barns, preparing feasts. These group efforts created a collective rhythm, one not measured by any person, but by the whole community moving together. People often worked while singing. Work songs had steady beats that helped synchronize movements. Rowing, threshing grain, pounding grain, pulling ropes, weaving large pieces of fabric, grinding food. A song might last a few minutes, and over generations, people developed an intuitive sense of how long an activity took by how many songs they sang. This method was beautiful, practical, and unifying. When voices blended together, the work felt lighter. A long task became manageable simply by dividing it into musical intervals. Time became not an external force, but an internal harmony, shared among many beating hearts. Seasonal labor as a grand cycle of time, the ultimate measure of time, greater than daily cycles, greater even than months, was the year itself. Seasons formed the backbone of life's rhythm. Spring meant sowing, building, repairing and planning. Summer meant tending and growing. Autumn meant harvesting, preparing, preserving, and celebrating. Winter meant rest, mending tools, storytelling, and spiritual reflection. Every job had a season. Every season had its tasks. No clock was needed to know when it was time to move from one phase to another. The earth announced it. When sap rose, when birds returned, when the first frost appeared, when certain flowers bloomed, when animals changed their behavior. Time was woven into the landscape itself. The tempo of human effort. Before mechanical timekeeping, people did not expect themselves to operate at a constant pace. Work had natural variations. moments of intensity, pauses for food or water, stretches of slow and steady effort. This way of working honored human limits. It allowed for flexibility. If the body was tired, a person rested. If a sudden rainstorm came, work paused. If inspiration sparked, a craftsperson worked later, guided by candlelight. Time was not a cage, but a companion. People followed its flow instead of forcing themselves into rigid schedules. This created a gentler relationship with life, one that modern people often yearn to rediscover. The quiet satisfaction of completion. When people finished a task, it was not because a deadline forced them. It was because the field was fully plowed, the pot was shaped, the cloth was woven, the house was built, the bread was risen, the season had turned. Completion was measured by the integrity of the work itself. This brought a deeper sense of fulfillment. People did not rush tasks for efficiency. They completed them with care, because time and craftsmanship were intertwined. In this way, life moved like a steady heartbeat, guided not by precision, but by purpose. Section 8. Navigating without clocks. Travel, trade, and the art of timing. Long before clocks ruled departure times, deadlines, and daily schedules, people journeyed across land and sea using a far more fluid understanding of time. Travel was not measured in hours, but in distances, landmarks, weather, and the endurance of people and animals. Trade routes, pilgrimages, and migrations all operated within this older framework. A world where timing was an art learned through generations, not a number displayed on a dial. This section explores how humans moved through the world when time was not something they carried in their pockets, but something they read from the sky, the earth, and the living creatures around them. The sun as a traveler's companion. For early travelers, the sun was the most reliable guide. Its rising and setting did not tell the exact hour, but it revealed the broad phases of the day. Early morning light, mid-morning brightness, the steep height of midday, the golden slant of late afternoon, the soft blue of evening. These phases were more than aesthetic. They shaped every step of a journey. At dawn, travelers began moving to make use of the cool morning air. Feet felt lighter, animals were energetic, and shadows were long and friendly. At midday, the sun's glare slowed everything. People found shade beneath trees or rock formations and rested while the world heated around them. Toward late afternoon, journeys resumed. The light was warmer, gentler, and the horizon seemed to open like a door. At dusk, it was time to find shelter, water, and a safe place to sleep. To ancient and medieval travelers, the sky itself was a map, drawing a rhythm they lived by, with quiet trust, counting time in distances, not hours, before clocks. People describe travel not in hours, but in units of effort. A day's walk, a morning's ride, a short distance before the sun reached its height. The time it takes to water the horses. The period between one meal and the next. These measures were practical because they were tied to the human body. They reflected the natural pace of movement, not an artificial measure. A messenger might say, "The next village is 2 rests away." A caravan leader might tell merchants, "We will reach the mountains by the 3rd morning." Hunters, knowing their terrain intimately, could tell how far a sound traveled by the look of trees swaying in the wind. This form of timekeeping was imprecise by modern standards, yet remarkably functional. Travelers rarely needed to know the hour, they needed to know only the flow of a journey. Landmarks as living timekeepers. When people traveled, they read the land not just for direction, but also for timing. A certain boulder might mark mid-morning. A particular cluster of trees might signal that midday approached. A distant ridge might indicate how much travel remained before nightfall. Roadside shrines, wells, or natural formations served as reference points known to everyone who passed that way. These landmarks became part of the shared language of travel. This was time expressed through geography, fluid, sensory, and tied to the landscape. Animal rhythms, the unspoken guides. Animals played a crucial role in travel, especially before mechanical transportation existed. Their biological rhythms shaped the timing of every journey. Horses needed water at regular intervals. Oxen moved slowly but steadily, requiring predictable rest breaks. Camels walked with a hypnotic, patient stride, capable of hour-long stretches if treated kindly. Donkeys, stubborn but reliable, determined their own pace with surprising accuracy. A traveler who ignored an animal's needs risked not only delay but survival. Thus, the timing of travel was formed by how long an animal could go without water, when it grew tired, how fast it walked over sand versus stone, how the temperature affected its strength. Animals became timekeepers in their own right, telling humans when to move, when to pause, and when to stop entirely. Weather as the master of time. Without clocks, weather held enormous power over travel. Storm clouds gathering on the horizon signaled urgency. Reach cover before the sky breaks. A clear morning after rain meant slower progress on muddy roads. A strong wind at sea could shorten a journey by days or stretch it dangerously long. Travelers became experts at reading signs. The scent of rain, the direction of clouds, the changing color of the sea, the behavior of birds before storms, the temperature shifts at sunrise. Because they relied on these patterns, their sense of time was deeply connected to the environment. Travel by night, stars as guides. In many cultures, especially those living in hot climates or desert regions, travel by night was common. Without clocks or compasses, people navigated by the stars. The North Star, Polaris, became a fixed anchor in the sky, pointing the way. Constellations revealed directions and the approximate progress of the night. Star maps existed long before mechanical clocks. The heavens were a living calendar. Their movement followed celestial arts, not hours. When the Milky Way appeared at a certain angle, they knew it was time to break camp. The night sky provided a profound, almost spiritual experience of time. Slow, vast, and eternal. Sea travel, the most ancient dance with time. Seafarers perhaps relied most heavily on non-clock forms of time. They read waves, tides, winds, and stars. They knew how long it took for water to rise and fall each day. how many knots a ship could travel in ideal conditions, how the moon influenced currents. Sailors counted time in watches, segments of night determined by tasks, not hours, shifts of the wind, the brightness of moon phases, the length of time it took to chant a work song while raising sails. Each voyage was a negotiation with forces much larger than any mechanical schedule, trade networks functioning without timepieces. Trade routes, some stretching thousands of kilometers, operated successfully for centuries without clocks. Merchants planned their journeys around seasons, availability of water, harvest cycles, market days, local customs, the position of the sun. A trade caravan could take weeks to cross a desert, and nobody ever asked if it would arrive at 3 p.m. on Thursday. They asked only if it would arrive before the dry season intensified, or before nomadic tribes moved through a region, or before goods spoiled. The world of commerce ran on broad timing, not precise timing. The freedom and uncertainty of clockless travel. Travel without clocks had its advantages. Less stress, greater flexibility, natural pacing, deeper connection to the world around you. But it also carried uncertainty. Sudden storms, missed seasonal windows, misjudged distances, natural hazards. Yet people accepted this uncertainty as part of life, not as a flaw. Time before clocks was less predictable, yet somehow more human. A journey was not an item on a schedule. It was an experience shaped by the earth, sky, and body. Section 9. The language of the bells and drums. Long before the idea of a ticking clock existed, long before numbers on a dial told people when to wake, work, eat, or gather, communities relied on something far more organic and deeply woven into their cultural identity: the language of sound. In many parts of the world, bells, drums, horns, and even carved wooden clappers became the instruments through which time was communicated, not as exact minutes, but as shared cues that guided entire societies. This section explores that world, a world where sound itself was the clock, where rhythm replaced numerals, and where the human relationship with time was collective rather than personal. The bell as a universal signal. In medieval Europe, bells were the unchallenged rulers of daily rhythm. Towns, villages, monasteries, and farms all lived under their acoustic influence. A single bell tower could command the movement of hundreds of people, not by telling them it's 6 o'clock, but by broadcasting a completely different kind of message. Now it's time to gather. Now it's time to work. Now it's time to pray. Now danger is near. Now someone has passed away. Each purpose carried a different sequence of rings: long, short, fast, slow. The citizens did not need to measure time. They needed only to recognize it. In monasteries, for instance, bells structured the entire day through the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. These were not hours in the modern sense. They shifted with the seasons and changed in length as daylight waxed and waned. Yet monks moved through their routines with perfect order, because the bell told them what the sun alone could not: when to begin a sacred duty. Imagine the calmness of such a life. No alarms, no countdowns, no rushing to match a minute hand. Only the gentle rolling of a bell across a valley, reminding you of your next task. Drums, the clocks of villages and kingdoms. In many African, Asian, and indigenous cultures, drums served a role similar to bells, but deeper, more varied, and richer in meaning. Drums could speak across great distances. They could echo across forests, over hills, through villages, and even communicate coded signals. For example, in parts of West and Central Africa, talking drums conveyed not just time, but messages, warnings, invitations, celebrations, announcements of travel, or calls to gather. The sound patterns were so distinctive that entire communities understood their meanings. Timing for work, rituals, cooking, planting seasons, and communal events all began with rhythmic beats, not mechanical ticks. A series of 2 short beats, followed by silence, might call people to begin preparing fields. A long roll might signal the beginning of a ceremony. A rapid, hard sequence might warn of danger or summon warriors. People lived not by minutes, but by sound patterns that shaped their day. There was something profoundly collective about it. One drum could bring an entire village into harmony. Sound as social time. What's fascinating is that bells and drums didn't just tell time. They shaped social behavior. Sound cues created shared experiences. Everyone heard them at once. Everyone reacted together. Everyone moved to the same rhythm. This reinforced bonds between people and gave time a sense of togetherness. Today, time is individual. We set our own alarms, follow our own calendars, manage our own minutes. But in the past, time was communal. A village bell ringing for an evening meal meant families would see each other at the central fire. A drum calling a marketplace gathering meant community members would trade, talk, laugh, and exchange stories. The sound that marked the end of the workday was a shared sigh of relief across farmland or town streets. Time was not a private experience. It was a public symphony, ceremonial and sacred timing through sound. The use of bells and drums extended into sacred realms. For ancient societies, sound did more than guide daily tasks. It marked transitions between worldly life and spiritual practice. In Buddhist temples, for example, the large bronze bells, bonsho, were struck before meditation sessions, rituals, or offerings. The deep, resonant vibrations didn't mark a number on a clock. Instead, they served as an invitation to enter a quieter state. Similarly, in Shinto shrines, bells are rung to attract the attention of kami, spirits, before prayer. The focus was not What time is it? But what moment is this? In indigenous cultures of the Americas, drums were the heartbeats of ceremonies, dances, and initiation rites. They established a rhythm that participants followed intuitively, binding them together and connecting them to ancestral memory. Even in medieval Christian Europe, the ringing of the Angelus bell 3 times a day wasn't about measuring precise hours. It was about aligning the spirit with moments of reflection. Sound made time feel alive, something you entered into, rather than something you watched slip by. The natural harmony of a sound-based day. When people lived by bells and drums, time felt softer, more fluid, more human. There were no exact minutes to chase, only cues that brought the day into alignment. The absence of precise clocks meant stress levels were lower. Schedules allowed for natural variation. People stayed more present. The world felt less rushed. Life unfolded in a rhythm rather than a race. Imagine a life where your morning begins not with a phone alarm, but with a slow, enriched chime drifting across rooftops, or a warm drumbeat rising with the sun. A life where you know what to do next because the community moves together, not because your watch tells you the seconds. This was the world of our ancestors, gentle, collective, and grounded. Why this system worked perfectly without clocks. People didn't simply accept these systems. They thrived under them. Bells and drums worked so well because they were audible across distance, easy to interpret, free from the need for personal devices, culturally meaningful, emotionally resonant, and most importantly, they allowed societies to remain connected with each other and the natural world, instead of depending on precise measurements. Section 10. Time in the movement of animals. Long before clocks existed, long before gears, hourglasses, sundials, or bells, humans learned to understand time by watching the creatures around them. Animals, in their elegance and repetition, became living calendars, moving clocks, and silent teachers. Their migrations, songs, feeding habits, and daily movements offered signals that entire communities depended on. In this section, we dive deeply into how people use the rhythms of animals to navigate the passing of days, seasons, and years. This wasn't a rough guesswork system. It was a deeply skilled art, built on careful observation, intuition, and generations of knowledge passed from elders to children. The daily clock of wildlife across the world. Animals keep dependable schedules. Before mechanical timekeeping existed, humans learned these schedules intimately and used them as reference points. Consider early farmers, hunter-gatherers, and nomadic people. They observed that birds begin singing long before sunrise. Insects become active at certain times of the day. Grazing animals move in predictable patterns. Predators emerge in particular light conditions. Domestic animals behave rhythmically, responding to daylight, hunger, or instinct. These daily patterns were so constant that they created natural time markers. The first bird calls signaled dawn approaches. The chorus grew louder just as the sun broke over the horizon. Livestock stirred from rest at mid-morning. Bees returned to their hives in late afternoon. Frogs began calling at dusk. Nocturnal creatures emerged exactly when twilight deepened. To people who lived close to nature, this was more reliable than a clock could ever be. You didn't need to check a device. You simply listened, watched, and felt the world around you. Humans were so attuned to animals that they could sense the time of day almost automatically. Birdsong as the earliest morning alarm. Birds are among the most consistent daily timekeepers. Long before humans created alarms, the world woke with the birds. Different species sang at different stages of twilight. Robins began the earliest pre-dawn calls. Blackbirds and thrushes joined as the sky lightened. Small songbirds like wrens filled the air closer to sunrise. Cockerels crowed only once the ambient light reached a certain threshold. This predictable layering of sound formed what many traditions called the dawn chorus. Humans knew exactly where they were in the early morning simply by listening to which birds were singing. In many cultures, elders could even say things like, "It's time to gather firewood now. The robins have finished their first call." Or, "The sun will appear in a moment. The thrushes have joined the chorus." Birds made the early hours feel calm, predictable, and gently guided. The shepherd's clock, livestock as timekeepers. People who worked with animals as part of daily survival, shepherds, farmers, ranchers, knew time through the behavior of their animals. Sheep, goats, and cattle follow consistent grazing rhythms. A shepherd didn't need a watch to know the hour. He watched his flock. When the herd shifted into shade, midday was near. When animals rested chewing cud, it was the heat of the afternoon. When they moved downhill, evening was beginning. When they huddled or grew restless, night approached. Similarly, in agricultural communities, chickens naturally returned to their coop at dusk. Cows returned from pasture when day cooled. Horses became alert or restless at specific hours. Farmers lived by these rhythms effortlessly. Their animals told them when to milk, feed, move fields, and return home. More importantly, animals kept them grounded in slow time, the opposite of the rushed, mechanical time we experience today. Seasonal rhythms, animals as nature's calendar. The greatest strength of animal-based timekeeping wasn't daily, it was seasonal. Long before calendars existed, people knew the time of year by watching animal migrations, breeding cycles, and behavioral changes. For example, the return of swallows signaled spring. The gathering of geese predicted autumn's arrival. The disappearance of certain insects forecasted winter. The mating calls of frogs indicated the rainy season. Deer shedding velvet signaled the approach of colder months. The fattening of bears meant harvest season. Entire agricultural schedules relied on these signs. Planting, harvesting, cooking, storing food, weaving clothes, drying herbs, building shelters. People didn't say, "It's April now." They said, "The swallows have returned. Planting begins soon." This kept human life deeply connected to nature's pace. Animals predicting weather and natural shifts. Animals are incredibly sensitive to atmospheric changes, barometric pressure, humidity, temperature, and air movements. Ancient societies leveraged this sensitivity. For example, birds flew lower before storms. Ants sealed their mounds ahead of rain. Cows lay down when heavy weather approached. Crickets chirped faster in warmth and slower in cold. Frogs croaked loudly before rainfall. Bees stayed near the hive when pressure fluctuated. Communities read these signs like we read weather apps today. A shift in behavior didn't simply predict weather, it predicted timing. When to travel, when to cook certain foods, when to store harvests, when to prepare shelters, when to call gatherings. Time wasn't abstract, it was practical, woven into environmental awareness. Animals in mythic time in many cultures. Animals didn't just mark time, they embodied it. Stories, myths, and rituals framed them as keepers of cosmic cycles. Some examples: the Mayan calendar, linked deeply to animals like jaguars and serpents. Chinese zodiac cycles, 12-year rhythms tied to animals. Native American seasonal stories, where animal movements signal sacred moments. Nordic tales, where ravens marked passing events and transitions. By placing animals at the center of these stories, societies transformed the passage of time into a meaningful, comforting narrative. Time was not a machine. It was a living world filled with companions. The calming power of animal time. Living by animal rhythms created a slower, gentler life. People didn't force nature into their schedule. They allowed nature to guide them. This brought several benefits. Less anxiety because time wasn't exact or pressured. Greater mindfulness because noticing animals required presence. Deep environmental connection, fostering sustainability. Shared knowledge passed through generations. A feeling of harmony as humans moved with nature's flow. Instead of racing against a clock, people lived in a world where time fluttered, grazed, migrated, sang, and padded softly through forests and fields. Section 11. Time in the flow of water. Long before clocks, hourglasses, and watches, humans also observed the flow of water to mark the passage of time. Streams, rivers, tides, and rainfall created a living calendar, a gentle rhythm that shaped daily life, agricultural cycles, and even spiritual practices. In many ways, water was both a clock and a teacher, moving in ways that humans could read and respond to with remarkable precision. Rivers as natural timekeepers. 4 communities settled along rivers. The flow of water dictated life. People relied on the patterns of rivers to manage travel, planting, and fishing. High and low water levels indicated seasonal changes. Ice formation, or melting, signaled winter or spring. Currents guided navigation and helped predict the best times for crossing or fishing. In ancient Egypt, the Nile's annual flooding was crucial. The Egyptians understood that the river's rise and fall followed a predictable cycle, which allowed them to prepare fields for planting, plan harvests, build and maintain canals and dikes. The river itself became a living calendar, its rhythm informing every aspect of life. Observing subtle variations in the water's movement, the timing of floods, and the growth of aquatic plants was a sophisticated way of keeping time without any mechanical device. Rainfall and seasonal awareness. Even before calendars, rainfall marked the passage of seasons. Communities across the world developed an acute sense of when the rains would come and go, often using water-dependent plants and animals as guides. For example, in monsoon regions of India and Southeast Asia, the first heavy rains marked the start of planting season. In Mediterranean climates, winter rains dictated the sowing of grains. Indigenous peoples in the Americas observed water levels in streams and ponds to predict both planting and hunting seasons. Ancient societies understood that water was a messenger, signaling the appropriate timing for agricultural, hunting, and cultural activities. Tides as a natural timekeeper. Coastal communities had a particularly precise natural clock in the tides. These rhythmic rises and falls of seawater not only marked the hours of the day, but also guided the timing of essential tasks. Fishing required awareness of low or high tides. Travel along tidal flats was only safe at certain water levels. Shellfish and other edible marine resources were harvestable at predictable tidal moments. Ancient mariners, especially in places like the Pacific Islands, Northern Europe, and Southeast Asia, became experts in tidal timing by observing the moon, stars, and patterns of tidal rise and fall. They navigated safely across seas, long before compasses or chronometers existed. Water sounds and time. Humans also used the sound of water as a natural rhythm. Flowing streams, waterfalls, and rain provided auditory markers for daily and seasonal changes. A fast-flowing stream might indicate melting snow in spring. The gentle ripple of summer rains marked the growing season. The ice cracking and thawing in winter warned of seasonal transitions. These sounds created a calming cadence, a natural metronome that communities could attune themselves to, much like listening to birds or insects. Water in rituals and spiritual timekeeping. Water was not only practical, but also spiritual. Many ancient cultures intertwined water with sacred rituals, which often doubled as markers of time. In ancient Mesopotamia, river floods were celebrated as divine events, signaling renewal. The Japanese Shinto tradition reveres streams and waterfalls as sacred spaces, where the flow of water marks seasonal and ceremonial rhythms. In the Mediterranean, purification rites often coincided with changes in rainfall or river flow, marking sacred cycles. Through these practices, water became both a functional and symbolic clock, guiding daily life and connecting humans to larger cosmic rhythms. Constructed water clocks. While natural observation was primary, humans eventually created early water clocks, known as clepsydras. These devices measured time by regulating the flow of water from one container to another. Ancient Egyptians and Babylonians used them for agricultural and ceremonial purposes. In ancient Greece, clepsydras helped manage speeches and court sessions. In China, water clocks eventually evolved into complex mechanisms that drove astronomical instruments. Even with these innovations, water clocks mimicked the natural rhythms humans had already observed, bridging nature and technology. The flowing clock in daily life, living by water's rhythms, instilled a sense of patience, presence, and fluidity of time. People understood that time was not a rigid metric, but a moving, living entity, like the river itself. Work, rest, and play were organized around natural water cycles. Seasonal events and communal activities aligned with rainfall, river surges, or tidal shifts. Timekeeping became a deeply sensory experience, involving sight, sound, and touch. By watching water, humans learned to live in harmony with nature, developing a rhythm that supported survival, spirituality, and societal cohesion. Section 12. Shadows and Sun, Living by Light. Before the invention of clocks, humans also measured time through the movement of the sun. Light and shadow were some of the most intuitive and precise timekeepers available, and communities across the world learned to live by the sun's daily rhythm, crafting a natural schedule that dictated work, rest, and ritual. Sunrise and sunset as daily anchors. The simplest markers of time were sunrise and sunset, which defined the boundaries of each day. For early humans and agrarian societies, sunrise often marked the start of work, hunting, or farming. Sunset signaled rest, meals, and social or spiritual gatherings. In many cultures, the timing of these events was more than practical. It was symbolic. The rising sun represented renewal, light, and life, while the setting sun signified completion, euflection, and rest. People naturally adapted their daily routines around these luminous cues, giving life a sense of flow and rhythm. The shadows dance, sundials and gnomons. Observing shadows provided another layer of temporal precision. Early humans noticed that objects cast longer shadows in the morning and evening, and shorter shadows at noon. This understanding gave rise to the first sundials, gnomons, simple vertical sticks or obelisks, cast shadows on marked surfaces. The length and position of the shadow indicated different hours of the day. Ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, and Greeks refined sundials to improve accuracy for agriculture, religious ceremonies, and civic life. Even before formal sundials, humans intuitively used shadows to guide activities. Farmers gauged the best planting or harvesting times. Travelers judged how far they could safely go before nightfall. Communities scheduled meals, gatherings, and work periods based on shadow movement. Shadows were not just functional. They created a calm, contemplative relationship with the sun, reminding humans that time was a living rhythm, not a mechanical sequence. seasonal light, and annual cycles. Observing sunlight also revealed long-term patterns, forming the foundation for early calendars. Ancient people noticed that days grew longer in summer and shorter in winter, providing vital cues for agriculture and survival. Solstices and equinoxes were celebrated as pivotal moments of the year. Monumental structures, such as Stonehenge or the pyramids, were aligned to capture sunlight on specific days, marking seasonal transitions with precision. In this way, light and shadow served as both daily and annual timekeepers, linking human life to the broader cycles of the earth and sky. Windows and architecture as time tools. Before artificial lighting, humans also incorporated the sun into their dwellings to measure time. Windows and openings were oriented to capture the sun at specific hours. Shadows cast inside homes indicated morning, noon, and afternoon. Temples and communal spaces were designed so that light illuminated sacred objects at certain times of day or year. Living in these spaces required attention and awareness, making the movement of the sun part of everyday consciousness. People not only measured time, they experienced it through light and shadow, natural rhythms and work patterns. Daily activities naturally aligned with the sun's schedule. Agriculture. Crops were tended in the hours of daylight, avoiding the heat of midday or the cold of early morning. Craftsmanship. Artisans and builders planned work to maximize sunlight exposure. Education and storytelling. Lessons, songs, and community gatherings often occurred when light was abundant. This solar synchronization encouraged a lifestyle intimately connected with the earth, fostering both productivity and well-being. Without clocks, humans relied on sensory perception and observation to harmonize their lives with nature's rhythm. Nightfall and celestial companions. While the sun dictated the day, its absence gave rise to another form of natural timekeeping, the night sky. Observing stars, constellations, and the moon became essential for navigating at night, planning seasonal activities, conducting rituals. Sunlight and moonlight together created a continuous system of temporal guidance, where humans moved fluidly between day and night, guided by nature's own chronometers. Philosophical and spiritual dimensions. The movement of the sun was also deeply symbolic. Many cultures associated sunlight with life, clarity, and truth. The cyclical nature of existence, divine or cosmic order. Living by light was not only practical, it fostered reflection and mindfulness, a gentle awareness that each day was finite yet recurring, and that humans were part of a vast rhythmic universe. Section 13. Living Without Clocks. Reflections. As we reach the final section of this exploration into life before clocks, it's clear that time was experienced in a profoundly different way from today's world. People did not glance at digital displays or set alarms. Instead, they felt the passing of hours, days, and seasons through the rhythms of nature. The sun, shadows, stars, the moon, and even the behavior of animals became their guides, shaping daily life with subtle cues and steady patterns. A world measured by nature. Without clocks, life relied on observation, intuition, and routine. Morning chores began with the first light, and evenings ended when darkness settled. Meal times, work periods, and social gatherings were anchored in natural cycles, not arbitrary hours. The passage of time was not quantified in minutes and seconds, but experienced as a flow, marked by changes in the environment. Farmers relied on daylight to sow, tend, and harvest crops, recognizing that productivity was tied to the natural world. Artisans and builders organized work according to sun positions, making efficiency a matter of observation rather than schedules. Families and communities synchronized life with light and sound. The crow of a rooster, the ebb of a river, or the shadows cast on their walls. Time, in this sense, was felt rather than measured, creating a rhythm that connected humans intimately with their surroundings. The mindfulness of natural time. Living without clocks encouraged mindfulness and presence. People became keen observers of their environment, attuned to the subtle shifts that signaled change. They noticed the first rays of dawn, the crescendo of morning bird calls, or the gradual lengthening of shadows toward evening. This attentiveness brought with it a deeper sense of place and purpose. Tasks were performed in harmony with natural cycles, and people cultivated patience, accepting that some things, like the rising and setting of the sun, could not be hurried. Even leisure followed these rhythms, with stories, songs, and celebrations unfolding when light allowed and energy permitted. Communities in sync. Time was not just personal, it was communal. Villages, towns, and even cities depended on collective understanding of natural time cues. Public work, markets, religious ceremonies, and social events were coordinated through shared observations of light, sound, and celestial movement. This fostered strong communal bonds as everyone relied on the same rhythms. The day was a shared experience, and people developed a sense of synchronized living without ever needing a clock. Life was collectively regulated by nature, weaving a web of connection between individuals, their environment, and each other. Seasons, festivals, and the bigger picture, long-term time awareness came from tracking the seasons and celestial cycles. Ancient societies celebrated solstices, equinoxes, and agricultural milestones, integrating natural rhythms into culture and ritual. These practices created meaningful markers in life, connecting work and play, birth and death, celebration and reflection. For example, farmers timed planting and harvest according to daylight and lunar cycles. Religious ceremonies often coincided with astronomical events. Festivals, storytelling, and social gatherings were aligned with seasonal changes, reinforcing the interdependence between humans and nature. Through this interplay, Humans achieved a holistic understanding of time that encompassed both immediate hours and the unfolding of life's seasons. The calm of a clock-free life. Without the constant ticking of a clock, life was slower, gentler, and less fragmented. People were guided by natural cues rather than deadlines, and this fostered a calming rhythm. Work and rest were balanced by the light of day and the darkness of night, creating a harmony that modern schedules often disrupt. Even modern historians and anthropologists note the psychological benefits of this connection. Living attuned to natural rhythms can reduce stress, promote better sleep, and encourage reflection, showing that ancient practices still hold lessons for contemporary life, lessons for today. In a world dominated by technology, notifications, and strict schedules, there is value in remembering how humans once lived. Observing natural rhythms like sunrise, sunset, and the cycles of the moon can restore a sense of inner calm and perspective, encourage mindful living, where tasks are approached deliberately, reconnect us to environmental and seasonal awareness, foster a collective understanding of time in communities and families. By studying life without clocks, we discover not only history, but also insights into how humans thrive when aligned with nature, rather than enslaved to artificial measures. Conclusion: life without clocks was not primitive. It was deeply attuned, rhythmic, and harmonious. Humans experience time as a living, breathing phenomenon, guided by the sun, shadows, stars, and seasons. Communities flourished through shared awareness, and individuals developed intuitive skills, patience, and mindfulness. Each day was framed by nature, each season celebrated, and each night marked by celestial observation. The most striking realization is this: humans did not need clocks to live fully. They needed awareness, observation, and connection. And through these, life was rich, grounded, and beautifully ordered by the world itself.